Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. The United States offers NATO-style security guarantees to Ukraine as talks with European and Ukrainian officials show progress towards ending the war. US envoys warn the offer is time-limited, with no agreement yet on territorial concessions. Australian police say the vehicle used by the Bondi Beach attackers contained homemade Islamic State flags and improvised explosive devices as the investigation continues. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the attack appears IS-inspired and announces plans to tighten gun laws and accelerate a national firearms register. Los Angeles police charged the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner with the murder of his parents after they are found dead at their home. Authorities say the 32-year-old suspect is in custody without bail. President Donald Trump sues the BBC for defamation over edited footage of a January the 6th speech that he says misrepresented his words. Trump seeks up to $10 billion in damages after the BBC admits an editing error but denies any legal basis for the claim. The United States military says it carries out strikes on 3 vessels in international waters in the Eastern Pacific, killing 8 people. U.S. Southern Command says intelligence shows the boats are operating along known narco-trafficking routes. President Donald Trump says he has asked Chinese leader Xi Jinping to consider releasing Hong Kong pro-democracy tycoon Jimmy Lai after his conviction under the national security law. The UK also calls for Lai's immediate release, describing the case as politically motivated. Appeals judges at the International Criminal Court reject an Israeli challenge to the court's investigation into the Gaza war. The judges rule the prosecution may examine alleged crimes following the October the 7th Hamas attack on Israel. Britain's Financial Conduct Authority launches a broad consultation on proposed rules for the crypto industry ahead of formal regulation in 2027. The FCA says the share of UK adults holding crypto has fallen from 12% to 8% in the past year. We start with some updates from the ongoing Russia and Ukraine war. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says talks in Berlin have delivered real and concrete progress towards ending the war in Ukraine. Speaking after meetings with European leaders and President Volodymyr Zelensky, she stressed that close alignment between Kyiv, Washington, and Europe is essential for a lasting peace that protects Ukraine's sovereignty. The talks were held to support ongoing negotiations between US and Ukrainian officials, but pressure on Kyiv is growing. US negotiators have told Ukraine it would need to withdraw forces from the eastern Donetsk region under any deal with Russia. Let's take a listen in to European Commission President.
Meeting tonight in Berlin, because we're seeing real and concrete progress. That progress is made possible thanks to the alignment between Ukraine, Europe, and the United States. So we will continue working closely with President Zelensky and President Trump to achieve what we all want: a just and lasting peace that preserves Ukraine's sovereignty and strengthens its security. Our approach is clear, and we work on every step that will ultimately put an end to the bloodshed. The first step is a lasting ceasefire. The path to get there is known. Russia must feel sustained pressure to come to the negotiation table.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says the United States has offered Ukraine remarkable security guarantees, marking a major step towards a possible peace process. He warns that failing to transfer seized Russian assets to Ukraine would damage the European Union for years to come. Merz says progress has been made in talks with the United States and Ukrainian officials, but stresses that key issues, especially territory, remain unresolved and must be decided by Ukraine. Let's take a listen in to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's statements today.
Wir haben in den vergangenen Tagen eine große diplomatische Dynamik, vielleicht die größte seit dem Beginn des Krieges am 24. Februar 2022 erlebt. Wir haben jetzt die Chance auf einen echten Friedensprozess für die Ukraine. Diese Pflanze ist noch klein, aber die Chance ist real. Zu ebnen. Wir alle wissen um den Preis des Krieges. Jetzt ist es an der Zeit, über den Preis des Friedens miteinander zu reden. Dazu gehören Fragen der Sicherheitsgarantien, der Territorien und einem wirksamen Mechanismus, der einen Waffenstillstand.
Apologies, that of course was German Chancellor Friedrich Merz speaking there. To join us in this discussion on these recent developments, diplomatic developments today, is Dr. Asta Chadha. She's an Associate Professor of International Relations, joining us live from Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. Thank you very much for joining us here. Dr. Chadha, your analysis of the developments today, of course, the main point still remains territory. However, what we've got is a withdrawal from ambitions of NATO for Ukraine. We've also got Article 5 style security guarantees. Europe as well have proposed putting troops on the ground on the Eastern Front, and we've got a request from the United States for Ukrainian troops to withdraw from that Donetsk region. Do these negotiations feel different to you in contrast to the ones that we've had previously?
Thank you, Thomas, for inviting me to discuss this issue. I mean, well, in one way, you can definitely look at this proposed deal as progress, over the previous one, because in large parts, some party or another to this conflict was feeling left out of the dialogue entirely. So this time, given that US together with the European representatives, they were there to discuss what would be the best course forward, given the new realities, given the new, advances that both Russia or Ukraine have made respectively in the territories that they claim that they are controlling. They needed something new. They needed to ensure also that, as President Zelensky mentioned, some very credible guarantees that would deter further conflict in the region. In terms of, if you look at it superficially, it looks like definitely there's a sustained support in terms of troops. You mentioned multinational forces, several countries willing to put their men down on the eastern border, and the fact that, US as well as Europe would be willing to provide economic support to Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. Those all sound good. But the key issue remains, I would say, still unresolved, which is who would need to give up the territory. Would Ukraine be forced to give up the territory, which according to Ukraine is, not acceptable? It is far from the ideal plan that Ukraine was seeking in terms of peace. Or would Russia be asked to, give up the territory? And if you look at the news, we are hearing that they've captured yet another, another small town, Varvarika, I think it's called.
Yeah.
So given the fact that, Russia is coming out with these videos should also be seen as both, a counter to this US and European claim of a successful peace proposal at some level, but it also allows Russia to negotiate the terms of peace. Because given that how Russia is calculating this, it clearly sees the Western world aligned on Ukrainian peace against Russia at this point. So I suppose in one way you could look at this deal as probably a diplomatic and a dialogue progress, given that all parties sat together and discussed whatever they are calling it, a platinum security or a NATO-like security guarantee. But the crux of the matter, the heart of the matter is still territory, which seems to be very, very unresolved.
Yeah, they're certainly leaving the hardest till last, aren't they? Dr. Chadha, of course, there are even talks about Russia getting territory that they don't occupy yet. If Russia does get this territory up front, what incentive does it have to honour any future security arrangements?
I mean, absolutely, that is one of the questions which has been puzzling, I think, at least the Europeans for the longest time. How do they ensure, even if there's a ceasefire or even if there's an acceptance of deal, how do they ensure that, the terms are kept long run? And, one thing we must understand that there is so much mistrust when it comes to Russia, US, and Russia, Europe, that I mean, it seems unforeseeable as to what kind of ceasefire or what kind of diplomatic effort would keep them, both of them, in line. But if let's say, hypothetically, if this deal were to include Russia to continue to take control of the occupied territories or govern them in some case, one could assume that Russia's medium-term plan would be to convert those areas into some sort of a buffer zone, of some kind, so as to keep the forces of Europe very, very far from its own territory. That probably could be seen, strategically. But the fact that, will it ever, forever be able to deter any future violence? I mean, that's a big question mark.
Dr. Chadha, stay with us as we have further updates coming to our viewers. We now move on, and Turkey says it shot down an uncontrolled drone approaching its airspace over the Black Sea. The Defense Ministry says Turkish and NATO F-16 jets were put on alert to secure the country's airspace. The drone was destroyed safely, though its type and origin were not disclosed. The incident comes after Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports damaged 3 Turkish-owned cargo ships. Moscow had warned it could cut Ukraine off from the sea following attacks on tankers exporting Russian oil. Dr. Chadha, this incident comes just days after Russian strikes damaged Turkish-owned cargo ships at Ukrainian ports. Do you think this should be seen as a direct challenge to Turkey's economic and maritime interests?
I mean, you're right. This is definitely a security crisis, at least for Turkey in terms of its maritime security or maritime interests. But we must not forget that Turkey remains one of those few in Europe that maintain a hardline neutrality, and they want to maintain ties with Ukraine, but they also want to maintain ties with Moscow. And Turkey is also one of those nations that have not imposed any of the European or US backed sanctions against Russia. So, in light of it, what seems more likely is that, given that Russia-Ukraine conflict is no longer being fought only on the borders, it's also being fought, it's been brought into the maritime territory, it's been brought into the Black Sea. And that is where I think Turkey's interest lies, in making sure that its own commercial navigation, its own vessels do not get targeted anymore. So it's very, very likely that, regarding this peace plan and the proposal that we were discussing just now, it's very likely that Turkey might seek a separate sort of a peace plan with regard to maritime security. And probably the Black Sea would not be covered to the extent that Turkey would want, within the purview of that maritime security. And lastly, I mean, I must stress this again. Turkey seems to want to play, at some level, a negotiator, or at some level the middle person to facilitate a dialogue between both Moscow and Kiev, because it wants them not only to exercise restraint in their borders but also in the maritime zone. So it's going to be crucial for Turkey also as a player to ensure that there is a de-escalation of this wider conflict, not only in Europe but also when it comes to the wider maritime space.
Dr. Chadha, stay with us once again as we move over to the United States for our next story. And a manhunt is intensifying for the gunman behind a deadly shooting at Brown University as authorities release new images of a person of interest and announce a $50,000 reward for information. The attack killed 2 students and wounded 9 others after a gunman opened fire inside a classroom before fleeing the campus in Providence. Police say the suspect remains at large and is considered armed and dangerous. Investigators have released surveillance footage showing a stocky man dressed in dark clothing, wearing a hat and face mask, walking through a neighborhood near campus about 2 hours before the shooting. Officers are now going door to door seeking home security camera footage. A man briefly detained over the weekend as a person of interest has since been released, with officials saying there is no basis to link him to the attack. City leaders say there are no credible threats, but a heightened police presence remains as police and students stay on edge. Dr. Chadha, this manhunt has been going on for a few days now. Your thoughts on the developments in regards to this story, and the slack, not the slack per se, but the amount of time that this is taking the Rhode Island police to get a hold of this suspect, especially in a situation which unfortunately is rather common in the United States around a university campus.
Absolutely, Thomas. I mean, this is, one of those cases where timing is very, very important, specifically when it comes to catching hold of the perpetrator. And given that, yet again, very unfortunately, it happened to be a campus, it happened to be a place where, students had gathered. And we're not just talking about domestic students, we are also talking international students in one of the most, reputed universities in the United States. And the fact that police has taken action, I mean, earlier I heard that they had some person of interest, but then that person had to be released because they didn't have a basis. That again raises a lot of questions, on one hand, with the kind of investigation that is going on and the kind of information the police is willing to share at some point. One could say that this is probably a result of them not wanting to interfere with the investigation. That's why they're not releasing too much information. But at the same time, too much time has already passed. But there is one question that continues to loom again and again, as you mentioned, because this is not the first time, unfortunately, that this is happening. Clearly, the US government has not taken a stance on this violence. They've expressed their condolences, they've expressed their heartbreak over the victims and those that were impacted, but there has been no declaration when it comes to the kind of violence. There seems to be no direct ideological, political, domestic connection to this incident that the government has stated openly. Neither the law enforcement has said anything about it being an act of terror and what kind of terror. And, lastly, there seems to be complete silence when it comes to the administration with regards to gun laws and gun violence. And, that's a question, I think, which is obviously a policy question, but also a question of deep introspection for United States when it comes to making sure that such incidents do not occur again.
Dr. Asta Chadha, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. The US President Donald Trump has said he feels so badly that Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai was convicted, and says that he has asked Chinese President Xi Jinping to consider his release. Let's take a listen in to the US President's statements.
I feel so badly. I spoke to President Xi about it, and I asked to consider his release. He's not well. He's an older man and he's not well, so I did put that request out. We'll see what happens.
UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has also called for Lai's immediate release following his prosecution under a Chinese-mandated national security law. She has also said that London has summoned the Chinese ambassador on the issue. Let's take a listen in to the UK Foreign Secretary.
Jimmy Lai is a British citizen. He has been targeted by the Chinese and Hong Kong governments for peacefully exercising his right to freedom of expression. This was a politically motivated prosecution, which I strongly condemn. Jimmy Lai now faces the prospect of a sentence which, for a man of 78 years, could mean the rest of his life in prison. I call again for Jimmy Lai's immediate release. On my instruction, the Foreign Office has today summoned the Chinese ambassador to underline our position in the strong...
Meanwhile, Lai's daughter Claire has warned China that her father will be a martyr if he dies in prison, as she voiced alarm for his health. Lai was found guilty on 2 counts of conspiracy to collude with foreign forces and 1 count of sedition under a China-imposed national security law that could see him jailed for life. Let's in fact listen into what his daughter said.
China should do here the only just and the only honorable thing, which is to release my 78-year-old father. And my father represents everything good and about, what is, or what at least once was, the financial crown jewel of China. Entrepreneurship, like hard work, ingenuity, like all of it. And it's off the backs of people like that Hong Kong became what it was. And, don't let my father die a martyr in prison. It's going to be a stain on your history that you won't be able to.
Ross Feingold joins us. He's a political analyst and he joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, pleasure to have you on the program. Of course, Hong Kong now 140th in the press freedom rankings worldwide out of 180. Prior to Chinese, the one state, two cities rule being implemented, was consistently in the top 20. You yourself have lived in Hong Kong, frequented Hong Kong many times. Have you seen the press atmosphere change, the press circuit? What more can you tell us about it before we get into this case specifically?
Yeah, certainly there's a change in the press atmosphere, and that's why Hong Kong's rankings have fallen, and the Hong Kong government would refute that. But the tone of criticism that could be made of government officials has significantly and probably forever changed. So there is definitely a room for discussion about public policy issues. And to be fair, that does differ from internally within the mainland under the one country, two systems. So people could still have a discussion about things like infrastructure projects or how government money is spent. But that being said, the legislature, Hong Kong's mini parliament, just had an election, and under a new system there, it basically facilitates only pro-government people being elected, so there aren't opposition members of Hong Kong's legislative council anymore. And most of the media outlets are generally pro-government. So again, although there might be a discussion and some back and forth about certain aspects of public policy, what you're not going to see anymore, which did exist in the past, is in not so many words, people saying, well, I think a government official is an idiot and I disagree with him, and they should get what's coming to them. You're not going to see wording like that anymore in public discourse in Hong Kong. So in that regard, it's actually like a number of other Asian countries, whether that's Singapore or Vietnam, Cambodia. There are places in this part of the world where you don't have that intense back and forth within the public discussion space. And we have that here in Taiwan, where I'm speaking from, and exists in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, a number of other places. But again, there are a number of places where you don't have that kind of back and forth, that hurling of insults and criticisms in public discussion. And that did used to exist in Hong Kong, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Yes, Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we have further updates coming out of North America this time. And the United States President Donald Trump has said that the drugs coming into the United States by sea, which are down to 94%, and vowed that the US is going to start hitting the cartels on land, which is going to be a lot easier. Trump described the cartels as a direct military threat to the United States of America, and has said that they are being legally declared enemies of the country. Let's listen in to what Trump had to say.
I have to say the drugs coming in by sea are down 94%. And we're trying to figure out who the other 6% are. But they're down 94%, and we're going to start hitting them on land, which is a lot easier to do, frankly. But these are a direct military threat to the United States of America. They're trying to drug out our country.
Meanwhile, the US Southern Command has said that it carried out kinetic strikes on 3 vessels in international waters, killing 8 men. Trump, however, has said that he is considering signing an executive order to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug. Let's listen in to what Trump has said.
Because a lot of people want to see it, the reclassification, because it leads to tremendous amounts of research that can't be done unless you reclassify. So we are looking at
Trump has also said that he would sign an executive order for classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. He has cited the fentanyl trafficking as a factor in his decision to put tariffs on Mexico, as well as Canada and China. Let's listen in to Trump's statements once again.
With this historic executive order I will sign today, we're formally classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, which is what it is. No bomb does what this is doing. 200 to 300,000 people die every year that we know of. So we're formally classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction.
Ross Feingold joins us once again. Ross, Donald Trump says that drugs into the United States are down 94%. We have over, which by the way has not been independently verified, we have over 90 people now dead in the Caribbean through strikes. We have tariffs on both Mexico and China, citing the influx of fentanyl into the United States, and we have a possible classification as fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Your take on Donald Trump's stance, his approach to the fentanyl crisis, the drugs crisis in the United States, of course, which the US is of course a huge sufferer of. Apologies, you seem to be muted, Ross. Okay, I believe we've got some audio issues there. Apologies there, Ross. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you, as always. We now move on to our final story. And the Venezuelan government has accused the United States of blatant theft after it seized a sanctioned oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan government has said that it would defend its sovereignty, natural resources, and national dignity with absolute determination, and would also denounce the seizure of the tanker before international bodies. Meanwhile, the Interior Minister of Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello, has responded. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
De manera inmediata cualquier contrato, acuerdo o negociación para el suministro de gas natural que tengamos con Trinidad y Tobago. Lo único que tienen que pagarlo. Robado no. Y ustedes creen que van a venir aquí, van a hacer algo y después van a venir a llevarse el petróleo de Venezuela. No se van a llevar ni una gota. Tengan la seguridad que no se van a poder llevar ni una gota de petróleo.
NVIDIA has acquired AI software firm SchemeMD to strengthen its position in the growing AI industry. The move comes as NVIDIA doubles down on open source technology to fend off rising competition. SchemeMD's Slurm software helps schedule large computing jobs used by AI developers for training and interference. The deal will see SchemeMD's software remain open source with paid support services. NVIDIA says Slurm is crucial for infrastructure for generative AI, while shares jumped 1.35% following the news. Financial terms of the acquisition were not disclosed. That's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.